based off what he says to the king. He literally says, I'm your servant and your son. Which you think he should be saying to God, ultimately. But he's saying it to a known enemy of Israel and Judah, and literally an extremely wicked and evil king. I'm a servant and your son. Come up and save me from the hand of the king of Assyria and from the hand of the king of Israel, who rise up against me. So that verse alone would have been bad enough. But then, of course, he doubles down, and he literally takes the silver and gold from the temple and gives it to him as a gift, essentially. But it's, when we read the rest of the chapter, it's not that surprising, because he clearly doesn't value God at all, so why would he value the things that are in the temple of the Lord? It's just another form of currency for him, really. And the king of Assyria does heed him, and he went up against Damascus and took it and carried its people captive to Kir and killed Rezin. But like, can you, from Ahaz's perspective, can you guys describe how it might have seemed like it was a good idea? Because from our perspective today, looking at this, we're like, okay, this guy was really not very smart. This is a terrible, of all the allies he could have made, he chose one of the worst. And people who were actively, by the way, they actively broke treaties. If you look throughout history, they were liars and killers. But of all the people he chose to make an ally with, he didn't even try to ally himself with Israel. Sadly, not that they were following the Lord really at all either, but he chose Assyria for some reason. And I don't know, if we were to attempt to play devil's advocate for him in this situation, if you were assigned to be his lawyer, how would you say this was a good idea? Because genuinely, I tried, and I was like, I can't see any way that even in his situation, this made a form of logical sense. Ricky?
I think what you said before, he didn't regard God. So here was a resource that wasn't sacred, that wasn't held in honor, and it was a good, made for a good bribe.
Yeah. But it's also just the fact that Israel and Judah had like a reputation. When they did seek out allies that weren't like following the Lord, in other places they sought help from Egypt. I'm trying to think where else. Egypt, Assyria. They made an allyship with each other, which actually last week we talked about when Israel and Judah had come together because Ahab wanted to go to war, which did not end well. Ahab died. But Egypt, you could argue, they hadn't had, obviously they had to leave Egypt hundreds of years before, and they were slaves there, but they hadn't really had conflict with Egypt in a long time. So you could sort of justify that one from a certain perspective. Still wrong. Assyria, though, was like an active problem for them, so it's kind of amusing that they went to them, of all people.
Chad, but Assyria at the time was probably a growing, powerful nation. You know, if you know your history, they became a conquering nation that they would just plow through lands and take over who they wanted. So of course, he knew, well, who better to go to, because Egypt had lost its power and glory. It was no longer a powerful nation, where Assyria was this growing nation. And so he not saying it was right, I'm just saying he knew where to go, because he wasn't a believer, he didn't believe in God. You know, he figured, I'll just use Assyria to come and help me, because I'm boxed in. And his further disregard for God was that to use the things in the temple to pay for what he needs. You know what I'm saying? Like he just took, take the stuff out of the temple and I'll use that to pay Assyria.
Mm-hmm.
So he had no regard for anything but his own personal safety and that he wanted to keep his kingdom. So he went to a strong nation.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's just, you could very easily argue, though, it's like, okay, he could have given them those jewels, and Assyria could have still just plowed through Judah anyway. Like, he had no guarantee whatsoever they would honor the truce that he tried to make with them. So, I don't know, it just makes him seem like he wasn't very wise, which, like, to be fair, the whole chapter is kind of proof he wasn't very wise. But in the moment of desperation and not seeking the Lord, that's how you wind up where he is ultimately.
Chad, I was thinking as well, I wonder in Ahaz's mind, things had fallen apart anyway.
Mm.
You know, and going back to what you opened with, sometimes when it looks like things are falling apart, it's like, where is God anyway? This doesn't make sense. We were one united nation with one God, and now look what happened. 12 tribes divided, and I mean, the enemy kind of capitalizes on that. And I wonder if Ahaz was just like, what difference does it make? It's sad when we get to that point in our walk on the narrow way where what difference does it make? Then we don't make any difference.
Yeah. Matt?
As in, just, I guess if you've already headed down that road of compromise. Oh, we already have high business.
What's one more?
You know, so it's just, I was thinking about this in the sense of like, you have God's people, and you have the armies of the world encroaching, laying siege. If you've already compromised, holiness is not that important. It's not that important. It's so easy just to reach out and say, hey, help us. And we'll capitulate to whatever you want. Whatever you want. I'm your son. I'm your servant. It's simple. It's just a next logical step in the process. We're the same. We're the same. There's no difference anymore. We're the same. Whereas, the Bible calls us to be separate, to be holy, to be God's chosen people. And once you release that,
Yeah.
what does it matter? We're just like you.
Yeah. So
I think his sadder testimony was that Uriah the priest doesn't speak up for God.
Yeah.
Ahaz sees the altar in where it was?
Damascus.
Or whatever. And he goes back to Uriah and said, that's what I want you to build me something like that. And Uriah just does it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like there was no separation anymore. We had just so mishmashed and mixed up together, it didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And he took all the precious things from the temple and already gave it to them.
Yeah.
So.
He doesn't even specifically say what they're worshiping. In fact, it almost seems more like they're worshiping the altar in general. Because on the great new altar burn the morning burnt offering, and evening the grain offering, the king's burnt sacrifice, his grain offering, with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, their grain offering and their drink offering. Sprinkle on it all the blood of burnt offerings and all the blood of sacrifice. And he doesn't even specify who they're worshiping. Obviously, it's not God, whatever they are worshiping, but.
But the funny thing is they knew all the right offerings.
Yeah, those are.
All those offerings in the book of Leviticus.
Yep.
They knew what the offerings were.
That's
To the wrong God, though.
Right. But they knew what the process was. Like, these are the right offerings we should offer, but that's sad. It's very sad.
Yeah, but you can come to church and do all the right things and not really be serving or worshiping the Lord at all. It can just become like a checklist for you, which I think is pretty much what it shows here. They took the checklist and they just positioned it towards something else.
It's making me think of all of the precious things that we've given away already. Marriage, we give it away. Raising our children, schooling really, especially in the United States of America, really came out of the church. The Bible was used as a school book.
Mm-hmm.
We've given that out a way. Just so many of the precious things that we had in this house, you know, we, not specifically, you know what I mean. We've given away, we've already given them away. We've given them away to the, you know.
And like all throughout Kings in general, you just see compromise always escalates consistently. Kind of like what you brought up before, because like, it's also why like when we have a besetting sin in our lives, we're supposed to deal with it and not just let it grow. Because what might seem like a small compromise originally, because if we go all the way back to before all this fell apart, we'll go back to Solomon. Originally wisest man, built the temple of the Lord and all of that. He takes one ungodly woman to be his wife, just one. And at first, it might not seem like that big of a deal. But eventually, he builds a place of worship for her, and then he proceeds to bring in over 1,000 other women from different places, and then builds temples and high places for their gods as well. And really, this all started with him, which all led to eventually the kingdom splitting up, the high places stick around for like a while, people worshiping other gods, and then the compromises from then just start to branch out to doing even worse things. Now they're burning their own children alive and stuff like that. And obviously here it's huge sins with ramifications for literally everyone involved. But even in our own personal lives, we have one thing that we're doing wrong. Let's say when we have a temper, we explode and we say hurtful things. That can literally branch to hurting other people, which then can affect an entire church. Usually, if you trace church splits or like when churches fall apart, it usually starts with one person having an issue with another person, and then it just spreads out. We're called to, as the Bible says, like the little foxes spoil the vine. It doesn't have to seem like a huge sin at the beginning. Obviously, God is telling you, you should deal with this, bring it before me, and then he will help you deal with the sin before it becomes a problem. I mean, as soon as it exists, it is a problem, but currently at the beginning, it might be just affecting you, but it never stays that way. It always eventually affects everyone else. And Kings is just a giant example of people compromising again and again and again till literally everyone suffers because of it. All right, question number 4. List some of the changes Ahaz made in the temple. Because boy, did he give it a bad makeover. This is in verses 15 through 18.
We took away the bronze altar.
Mm-hmm.
He told the priest, well, I'll use it for myself. And he replaced it with that altar that Uriah built for him, that replicated in Damascus.
Mm-hmm. By the way, another side note that's kind of funny is like they took the altar of the place of Damascus that like the Assyrians had just conquered. So whatever god they were worshiping clearly didn't help them. Mm-hmm. Yet he wants specifically that altar. Yeah. Like, what are we doing? Like, it would be one thing if he chose to take like the altar of God of like a place that had been like victorious in battle or something like that. But no, they literally just lost. And he's like, I want that altar. I like the design.
Don't you wonder what it must have looked like that he wanted it so
It must have looked great.
When you think about how the bronze altar was supposed to look like, it was a very plain altar.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't anything fancy. And, but then I think about, what did this altar look like that he wanted it? Oh, this is the one we have to have, everybody. Like, don't you wonder that? Like, it was just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
It was almost like an eye-catching thing.
Yeah. Well, 'cause the altar of the temple was not ever really about the altar. It was about who the sacrifice was for, really. Of course.
5 minutes, Chad.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For other nations, of course, who were serving like false gods, everything was like super vibrant, super ornate. It was all about what you could see. So it would make sense why this altar is probably really eye-catching and really ornate, but pointless in the grand scheme of things. And I think with question number 4, because for time's sake, we're also going to tackle on question number 5. What do Ahaz's changes within the temple suggest about his spiritual and political loyalties? Terry?
One thing that I know from talking to a Jewish rabbi about this many, many years ago, I mean, I don't know much about this, but anyone that takes an altar that is written in Leviticus or any of the Jewish Tanakh and makes as many changes as he does, he's basically, the sin he's committing, he's elevating what he thinks is right to the level of God and saying to God, I'm improving upon you, which is absolute idolatry and blasphemy of the highest order of Judaism, and that's his biggest sin. Not so much taking this brazen lever and throwing it on the ground or changing this and that. The fact that in his spirit, he changed what God said and decided that he knew more than God. That's idolatry, that's sin, and that's pride, all three at the same time, all worthy of death and hell. Immediately.
Well, I think you can see how like pride consistently, well, every single king, if you read throughout Kings, every single king that doesn't serve the Lord usually has a pretty massive ego, which shouldn't be that surprising. But you can definitely see that with Ahaz. But because from his perspective, I'm sure he was thinking about it, okay, listen, I arranged this alliance and it worked out great. I'm the best. That's probably what he was thinking at the time. So he was already a sinful man who was in no way following God at all. But now he's given himself the validation of being like, I had a problem and I solved the problem for literally everyone. So clearly, whatever I think is best. And, well, obviously, no. But what's interesting is like, he actually kind of made it through his life without facing major judgment or consequences for what he did wrong. Like, he dies, and he didn't die like in battle from what we see here. He kind of just lived out the rest of his life, corrupted the kingdom to an even greater extent, and then died. Obviously, we know before God, he's still very accountable, and there were still very much consequences after his death, but it kind of reminds me of David had written in the Psalms, sometimes it seems like evil is always prospering, and how like frustrating that can be. Because like he does all of this and kind of seems to get away with it in this life. Obviously we know he does not. He's accountable for God later, but I don't know, that seemed kind of frustrating to me. Because when I was rereading this, I was like, okay, I was waiting for the moment where it would all go horribly wrong for him. And it kind of seems to not do that. But like, how much damage did this man as king do to Judah ultimately? Like, he caused them to sin even more. He in no way caused them to worship the Lord. He defiled the temple even more than it was already defiled. He took valuable things that belonged to the Lord and literally sold them to buy himself a form of like salvation from his enemies, which again was temporary and done in the complete wrong way. And it's kind of like, well, time is almost up. It's kind of a depressing way to end. So I think even from this though, the beauty about Kings is like, you can read through Kings and be very, very frustrated the entire time. I think the real beauty in reading through Kings is ultimately seeing how faithful God is, despite how unfaithful we can be as a people. Because even throughout all of this, fortunately, I think the bit of hope at the end is when you see who his son is. Because his son is Hezekiah. And actually, I have to double check if this is the same Hezekiah before I make that statement. One second.
God works in mysterious ways.
Yes, it is. Good. I was making sure that it was not a Hezekiah, and I said that, and it turns out to be, no, this Hezekiah is not the one that you know and love. This one did not serve the Lord at all. But no, this is the correct Hezekiah. One of the most righteous kings Israel has. So even though Ahaz was a terrible man, a terrible king, and did all these horrible things, God's faithfulness would endure to Judah, and he would raise up a man who would truly seek after him despite the acts of his Father. So God's will is done regardless of our failings and our sin. And I think that's beautiful, honestly. So that's where we'll end. That's a far more positive note to end on. Dear Lord, we thank you that despite our sin, Lord, your will is still done. But I ask that, Lord, you would mold our hearts to want and seek after your will, Lord. We won't make plans or deals apart from you. We won't try and solve all of our problems, Lord, when we can't. We're not in control. You are. And help us to trust and seek you in all things. And bless us as we continue to worship you today.